In the state of Nuevo León, specifically in Mexico, an 18-year-old young woman named Devani Escobar did not return home after going to a party on the evening of April 8, 2022. What happened to her has become the most discussed news in Mexico, and debates about what actually happened continue to this day. Devani Escobar, the only child of Dolores and Mario Escobar, was a student of law and criminology. Friday, April 8, 2022, at around 8 p.m., she went to the party with two friends, but she didn't return home. The next day, a big number of police officers and volunteers joined the hunt for her. On April 11th, Devani's parents, who were desperately trying to locate her, shared a picture on her social media site, which revealed the first anomalies and specifics of her absence. The image, which was taken from the side by an unidentified person, shows the body standing in the center of a motorway. It's unknown if she was aware that she was being photographed at the time. When his daughter did not come home on April 9th, her father received this image and put a caption saying that this was the final time anyone saw his daughter, according to Mario. Additionally, he noted that Devani's group companions safely made it back to their homes. They allegedly placed Devani in a cab and requested that the driver take her home. This picture was taken at the time by a taxi driver. It wasn't immediately obvious how or why this photo was shot, but in Mexico, where femicide is a widespread issue and statistics show that 10 women disappear on average every day, it went viral and sparked a massive outrage. Protests found new traction in the state of Nuevo León alone, where 52 women went missing in the first quarter of 2022. On April 13th, hundreds of worried citizens marched through the streets of Monterrey, carrying banners with pictures of the missing ladies, while the detectives working on the case started to piece together what had happened before Devani's disappearance. Their case was supported by the young women's friends' statements and video evidence from security cameras. In light of the fact that Bonnie only met the second young woman on the day of her disappearance, it is important to note that calling the two young women Bonnie attended the party with friends is a stretch. The police discovered video from a business located about 4 miles away. The tape taken at 11:30 p.m. shows the young woman standing next to the cashier, 5 kilometers from the residence of the deceased. They also bought plastic glasses, Coke, and a 750 milliliter bottle of vodka. The party waited near the store for almost an hour, during which time they used some of the things they had bought. They departed the business at 12:49 a.m. and took a taxi to Nuevo Castillo Bar, which was about 8 kilometers away. When they got there, they discovered the event they were going to have. They were advised that another party was nearby, albeit it had already concluded, so they chose to head there at 1:30 a.m. Even though they were unknown at the private property party, the young women begged permission to enter. 2 hours and 15 minutes after they were given permission to enter, the body can be seen attempting to flee from a man on surveillance footage provided by the police, but he catches up with her and stops her. When other people arrive, Bonnie tries to kick the man again but misses. The argument appears to have been settled. When partygoers were questioned by the police, they said that the argument started because the body was very inebriated. She had earlier purchased a bottle of vodka, which some people tried to seize, but she wouldn't give it up and insulted them. It's crucial to remember that this account of what happened was given to Bonnie's friends, who decided to send her home by partygoers. They recorded the phone number of the cab driver who had taken them there, and at 3:54 a.m., she called him to request a ride to take the Bonnie home. When the taxi arrived at the spot, Devani climbed into the back seat alone, leaving her pals behind. They approached Cigar and spoke with the driver there. The interior of the automobile is illuminated in the following recording, which was made only 20 minutes later and 100 meters from where Devani boarded the taxi. The Bonnie appeared to be fighting with the driver, while already seated in the front seat. She was found to be unwilling to depart, and the taxi. The cabbie tried to phone her friend for assistance, but he was ignored. He sent her a WhatsApp message warning her that she was acting aggressively and refusing to leave at 4:25 a.m., and that he didn't know Devani's specific address. The taxi driver let Devani's companion know that she got out of the vehicle. He snapped a photo, the same one that depicts Bonnie standing in the middle of the road, as proof. The taxi driver pleaded with Bonnie's companion to visit or call the girl's parents frequently, but she refused. Devani's buddy ignored the taxi driver's request to gather because there was only 400 meters between where she got into the car and where the picture was taken. The cab driver made several futile attempts to contact your pal before being forced to leave. But before he left, he sent her a message explaining that he couldn't force Devani back into the car since he didn't want any issue or charges of kidnapping or other such behavior. After Devani vanished and this picture was released, rumors started to circulate. The young woman had gotten out of the cab because the driver was harassing her, he claimed. The taxi driver was questioned by the authorities numerous times. He searched his car and phone, but could find no evidence linking him to the young woman's abduction. The taxi driver left the young woman and fled, according to video that the police were able to retrieve from a transportation company's security camera. Devani was seen in the video standing in front of a camera that was pointed at the road. About 50 meters from the camera, a woman can be seen standing on the road for a while. It's hard to say if she was conscious of what she was doing at the time. But shortly Bonnie begins to approach the camera. There doesn't seem to be anyone pursuing her when she arrives at it at 4:30, as shown by the timestamp, knowing where Bonnie was last seen. The region where she was last seen was the focus of the search. Police reports state that Bonnie didn't step foot on the transportation company's property. A motel around 150 meters away from the transportation provider also had security cameras put there. However, as law enforcement officials noted, no recordings were created from these cameras because they were solely used for real-time observation of the location. Police and volunteers meticulously investigated the area of the transportation company, the motel, all nearby streets, and vacant lots, but no signs of the body were discovered. 100,000 pesos, or around $5,000 US, was offered as a reward. Was made in exchange for any details that would help with the investigation. Bonnie's body was discovered on the grounds of the motel, only 100 meters from where she had been last seen, 1 week after she vanished and after 12 days of assiduous searching by family volunteers and law enforcement. It is important to note that despite several searches by the authorities in the motel vicinity, the body was still missing on April 21st, when the motel personnel noticed a pungent odor coming from an abandoned building. They themselves alerted the police. From an underground tank where the body was later found. Let's examine the motel and its surroundings in more detail so that you can determine which tank is being discussed. There is a round building. These are the motel's primary structures, including the restaurant, which has been closed for a number of years, and the pool, which has not been used in a long time. There is only one entry from the road, and the entire area is cordoned off with barbed wire. The subterranean tank where Devani's body was is here, close to the wall. A lid covers the first tank, which has 2 openings that were both open, and the body was removed from the second tank, which has 2 entrances that were both open. The tank has a depth of 4 meters, 43 centimeters from top to bottom, and it is divided into 2 portions by a 20-centimeter partition within. At the time the body was found, the water level in the tank was 90 centimeters deep in both portions. It's also vital to remember that the interior barrier of the tank is not completely solid. The right and left sides of the tank are connected by a 23-centimeter wide channel. We shall come back to this point in a moment. Even more oddities started to show up as soon as Devani's body was found. The young woman's body was recovered from the water, but experts determined that the cause of death was a cranial brain damage in the forehead region, which might have been brought on by a fall into the cistern. The police quickly come to the conclusion that the occurrence was an accident. It was also found that the death occurred between 5 days and 2 weeks ago. Nevertheless, the father of the deceased did not accept the accident explanation and was perplexed as to why the police, who had searched the motel area numerous times, had not discovered the body of his daughter earlier. The Attorney General's Office of Nuevo León removed the special prosecutor in charge of missing person cases in response to these accusations, claiming carelessness and mistakes in the investigation. However, the prosecutor was present before dismissed recordings from 2 other security cameras, one at the motel reception and the other inside the vacant restaurant, also came to light. The police had previously asserted that the motel cameras only functioned in real time and did not record any images. We'll look at these recordings after I remind you that it was 4:30 when Devani was found on the road. The motel property was 150 meters away from the restaurant's entrance. Devani walked peacefully toward the transport firm, and no one was chasing after her. However, she stormed into the motel's grounds 5 minutes later, as if someone were after her. Devani was seen jogging alongside the restaurant by the camera that was placed across from the entrance. No one can be seen chasing her in the section of the film that the authorities released. Therefore, it can be assumed that something happened when she arrived at the gate to the transportation company. Anything compelled her to flee. The second recording is for my restaurant camera. We must first comprehend the area that this camera can catch before we can comprehend the locations where the body is visible in the video. Consequently, the door leading to the road is located in the upper right corner, and this glass door leads to the inner courtyard. You can only get to it by traveling around the restaurant at 4:35 and 31 seconds without climbing over the barbed wire gate. Bonnie may be seen rushing toward the entrance to the "she fled inside the motel grounds" on the footage at 4:36 after running to the street, as we've observed before. Bonnie moves closer to the glass door and peers inside before moving on to the spot where the fence edge meets the restaurant structure. She seemed to have spent the last 20 minutes cowering in a corner, concealing. Throughout those 20 minutes, nobody approached her. At 4:56, Bonnie comes around the corner and proceeds along the fence, eventually arriving at those cisterns. The official accounts of what happened state that the body stumbled and smacked her head when she lost consciousness of the open cistern in the shadows. The injury was in the area of the forehead, as was already indicated. If the young lady did really fall down by mistake, it is more likely that she did so after hitting her head. She would have leaned forward out of inertia had she taken a step without feeling the earth beneath her. The officials released an accelerated recording that lasted more than an hour to prove that nobody else was visible in this camera's field of vision. Upon careful observation at hour F4:56, the body emerged from the corner and proceeded along the fences. At 5:44, 30 seconds later, a shadow flickered on the door. At 5:47, 11 seconds, a car stopped opposite the door leading to the street. 12 seconds later, a silhouette of a person appeared next to that door. At 5:47, 44 seconds later, the car left. At 6:12, 14 seconds later, another shadow flickered on the door leading to the inner courtyard. To ascertain if someone was pursuing the recording, all available recordings are included below. Bonnie. According to the prosecutor's account, the police withheld the recordings from the video camera at the motel reception, which would require examination. Since Bonnie couldn't see the open cistern lids in the darkness, she fell and suffered a serious head injury that finally caused her death. Devani would have encountered 3 cisterns on her way to the cisterns. The first one would have been closed, followed by 2 open lids, but her body wasn't discovered there. The third one, but considering the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the body in the second, there were whispers going around that the young woman had been murdered before being put into the cistern. The authorities made evidence that suggested Devani was alive after falling into the cistern public in order to disprove these rumors. Her shoes and a scrap of cloth were also found there, along with her body, which was recovered in the left portion of the cistern. Furthermore, the wall that separates needs to be highlighted, dividing the cistern in half. Its width is 20 centimeters, and its height is 2 meters and 13 centimeters. The body's pocketbook, her face mask, and a white bra were discovered on top of the barrier. It is vital to realize that the only way to place anything on this barrier is to stoop down into the cistern. Since there is no way to go down or up inside the cistern, nothing can be placed on the barrier from the outside. The fact that Bonnie placed the items suggests that she was alive for a while, according to the officials. It is unclear whether Bonnie could have placed her belongings on the 2-meter, 13-centimeter high partition or if she threw them there. This suggests that Devani herself threw the items on the partition, a lighter and a set of 3 keys. Unfortunately, information regarding Bonnie's height could not be found. The appropriate area of the cistern contained both her phone and pocketbook. Although we can only guess as to what exactly transpired, if the body did fall and strike her in the head, she would have been bewildered, particularly given that it was dark. The barrier may have opened when she opted to toss her purse on it, allowing some of the contents to fall and land in the second half of the cistern. Devani's bra situation that evening is likewise unknown, as is whether or not it was in her purse. It's also not clear if she had a bra on that particular evening, or if it was in her handbag. It's also crucial to remember that she was dressed when her body was discovered. On one of the TV shows, the person's friends who she went to the party with said that she was intoxicated and that some people tried to take advantage of her, decided to send her home by calling a taxi. Right now, everything evidence points to the case being concluded and the death being classified as an accident. Damani's father disagrees with this account, and he thinks that someone was involved in his daughter's passing. The parents performed an independent examination after receiving the body, but the findings have not been made public. Mario Escobar claims that his future course of action depends on whether or not the authorities decide to keep looking into Bonnie's death or rule it out as an accident. What are your thoughts on this incident? Do you think it was a terrible accident or a criminal act? Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching.
A 16-year-old girl rode her bicycle home and vanished. Her body was discovered the following day in a field close to the road. She had been murdered, and the assailant had fled. Even though the police had the perpetrator's DNA sample, it took them 13 years to track him down. In this video, we'll explain Marian Vestra's fate and the reasons that this murder is one of the most infamous in Dutch history.
Welcome to A to Z Crime Stories. Before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more.
On August 10, 1982, Marian Vestra was born in the Netherlands. She resided in the tiny town of West Rene with her parents. The young woman was the youngest of 6 children and lived in a village in the north of the country, far from major cities. She had 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Marianne was left to live with her parents and one older brother after the majority of the older kids eventually moved away for other towns and countries. The young lady enjoyed music, went to the neighborhood school, and had lots of friends. Small towns and settlements scattered throughout the area where she lived were only a few kilometers apart from one another. Marianne frequently traveled to other cities as a result of this. Places in the area where she can go shopping or spend time with friends. She also had a part-time job at the neighborhood grocery store. On April 30, 1999, the nation observed Queen's Day, a significant holiday. After finishing her shift at the store, Marianne left to spend the evening with her friends at a nearby town called Colum. A short while later, Marianne's boyfriend and his friends joined their group, and they all made the decision to travel to the nearby town of Boynton Post, which was 6 kilometers away. Marianne didn't own a bicycle, so she borrowed one from her friends and went for a ride with them as the group rode their bicycles there. After some time, they made the decision to return home. The young woman set out for the town, which was about 11 kilometers away, but she never arrived. Marianne's parents learned that she had spent the night with a friend who lived nearby. The young woman had promised to be home by evening, and if she had chosen to spend the night with her friends, she would have kept that promise even though it was improbable. Definitely made an early morning call to home. To his surprise, Marianne's father surprised him by calling her best friend Affy's home. He learned that his daughter had bid her friend farewell that evening and left for home. Everyone realized that Marianne might have suffered a bad outcome at this point. They drove along Marianne's homecoming route after her friend called her boyfriend and invited her sister along. The young woman's father made the decision to call the police right away in the meantime. He informed them of his. In the meantime, Affy and her sister and boyfriend were driving near the settlement of Finkleister with vast fields on either side of the road when they noticed something shiny in the grass and stopped. As they approached the field, they saw a bicycle lying in the grass. Daughter had not returned home and none of her friends knew where she was. Soon 2 officers arrived to take a missing persons report, after which they returned to the station and prepared to begin their search. Mary Ann was lying there. She had a cut on her neck and was naked. They were all taken aback. Mary Ann's paws needed to be examined, but Affie was unable to bring herself to approach the body. Although it was clear that the young woman had passed away, her best friend was in such shock that he refused to accept it. She had a difficult time removing her phone before dialing 911. At the same time that several officers arrived on the scene, 2 of them went to Mary Ann's home. They didn't have official confirmation at the time. The officers picked up her father and took him to the scene after learning the victim's identity. The father, to his grief, recognized Mary Ann right away while the forensic investigators were already on the scene. The detectives examined the scene and noticed a crucial detail. There were 2 bicycle tracks leading from the road to the location where the young woman's body was lying and only 1 track going the other way, indicating that the murderer was also riding a bicycle. The area was combed by the police. They searched the area around the crime scene for hints and even used aerial photography, but all they discovered was a lighter. The police took Mary Ann's friend to the lab after learning that she didn't smoke and didn't have a lighter. Medical examiners discovered evidence of semen, which they used to create a sample of the killer's DNA, and concluded that the young woman had been abused. The lighter was found to contain the same DNA, which was uploaded to the police database, but no matches were found. As a result, the perpetrator had never been in trouble before. The Mary Ann boyfriend named Spencer was chosen by the police as a suspect almost immediately after the body was discovered. Although there was no evidence against him, the chief of the local police force believed that the boy was the most likely murderer in this case. The young man voluntarily gave a sample of his DNA, but it did not match the DNA that was discovered on the victim's body. In the interim, the incident had received extensive coverage in the area's print and television media. The public demanded that the police find the murderer as soon as possible because murders were practically unheard of. The issue was that the detectives were already at a standstill after just 1 week. They had the killer's DNA sample but no suspects. Additionally, there were a lot of calls from locals to the police. There was no evidence to support any of their theories, but some of them believed a familiar person might have been responsible for the murder. When asked where Mary Ann's body was, the vast majority of people pointed to a single location close to the field. A migration center for those who had requested asylum was discovered. The majority of those present were from Iran and Syria. This theory gained ground in the nearby towns with each passing day, and at one point an impressive number of people were absolutely certain that a refugee had carried out the murder. The police had to look into this possibility as a result. Mary Ann's funeral was held on May 5th. At that precise moment, nearly 1,500 people, many of them residents of nearby communities, came to support her family. The woman's parents planned a memorial 2 days later. They spoke to the crowd at the conclusion of the procession. A total of about 20,000 people attended the event, mostly as a result of the case receiving widespread national attention. Each day, more and more people called the police, and at one point, the detectives received a really good tip. Many people claimed to have seen Mary Ann in a cafe one evening as a certain Oriental-looking guy tried to get to know her. The guy made a gesture toward the young woman after she declined, placing his thumb along her throat because she was. The young man was killed in this way, and the police started looking for him right away. He was a 15-year-old refugee from the same migration center, it turned out. Although he acknowledged making the gesture, he refuted any involvement in the killing. DNA from the boy was provided, but it did not match that of the victim's body. Locals blamed the migrants from the center for the refugees in spite of this. Even more security guards had to be hired by the organization just in case. People arrived 12 days after the murder. Out to protest at the immigration center. They simply shouted commands to hand over the murderer at first, but by evening, things had significantly worsened. The building was targeted by several people who threw Molotov cocktails, prompting the police to step in. Since then, security at the center has been significantly increased, and similar demonstrations have not occurred again. A few days later, the police reported the arrest of Pitt, a 32-year-old resident of Mary Ann's town. He was a local drunkard and was despised by the majority of the locals. A witness called the police and reported seeing Pitt wearing bloody clothing, which led to the arrest. The man was arrested the night of the murder, and a sample of his DNA was sent to a lab. The news of the new suspect quickly spread throughout the country, but the DNA test didn't match the sample, and the witness later admitted to fabricating the entire case as retaliation against Pitt for a personal vendetta. Police began studying the log in order to look into any potential connections to the immigration center, a book that tracks every refugee departure from the asylum area. They were allowed to leave the center, but before doing so, they had to look in the log and note their destination. As it turned out, 2 refugees who had left the center the night of the murder had not given any indication of their destination. They were Mohammed, 19, and Ali, 26 years old. Police started looking into their potential involvement, but no information was made public for a while. The fact that investigators were restraining Marianne's family infuriated Marianne's father. Hannah discovered the murderer. He got in touch with a renowned crime reporter, who agreed to take the case and work to uncover more details. First, the 2 refugees who left the center on the night of the murder were in the same cafe as Marianne. They also left almost immediately after the young woman and her friends left, and second, ever since that very night, the whereabouts of these refugees have been unknown. The victim's father spoke out about these facts on a popular television program on July 1st. The men were unidentified, they had left the center and were not traceable by the police. They had pictures of both men at the same time, but for some reason the government withheld them from the public. After all of these details were broadcast on television, the police declared that they and Interpol were currently looking for these suspects. The predominant theory is that they might have left the nation. All of this has once more strained relations between locals and refugees. They came together once more in early October. On October 9th, Turkish police announced the capture of Ali, a 26-year-old suspect. He was brought to the Netherlands, where a DNA sample was taken and the necessary test was run. It turned out that he had been living in Istanbul the entire time. The man was exonerated because it did not match the sample that was discovered on the victim's body. The investigation has resumed, and even though her boyfriend's DNA does not match the original samples, the police's American family has started to suspect him once more. Spencer acted in a suspicious manner. Marianne would never ride her bike home at night because she was afraid of the dark and the distance wasn't that far, according to the young woman's friends and family. Even Marianne's parents agreed that Spencer ought to have sent Marianne home via camp. He decided to let her ride her bicycle alone instead. More questions were asked of the young man, and then an odd thing started to happen. He repeatedly modified his account of that evening in his testimony. Spencer initially claimed that he had met Marianne at a cafe, followed by a drive to the Butem Post for a second look. He claimed that the young lady had already arrived with friends when he arrived at the cafe, so Spencer rode his bicycle to meet her. He continued by saying that he had seen 2 guys walking a bicycle on the way there. Spencer initially claimed during one interrogation that he did not recognize them because it was very dark outside before revealing that they were 2 of his friends. The police had no evidence against Spencer, and his DNA did not match the murderers, making the whole situation seem strange. The case remained unresolved for several more months. On December 20th, the police made the decision to enlist the public's assistance. They requested DNA samples from all the local men, but there was trouble in store for them. The authorities set a cap for the police because it turned out that the law prohibited the mass collection of DNA from citizens even with their consent. Only 150 samples could be taken, and there were none that matched. After that, the case was essentially put on hold for several years. Marianne's parents attempted to have the law changed to permit extensive DNA screening, but they were denied. Despite the fact that similar actions had already resulted in the perpetrator's capture on numerous occasions in other nations, the justification was to protect people's privacy. The detectives released a rough description of the killer in July 2001. They thought the murderer was a local man between the ages of 20 and 40. Within a 5-kilometer radius of the Marianne murder scene, the police once more asked for permission to conduct an extensive collection of DNA samples, but they were once more turned down. After that, the case was finally put on hold. The victim's parents continued to appear on television programs and give interviews, But with each passing year, the case received less and less media attention and no fresh information to shed light on the horrifying mystery. The police put together a team in 2010 that produced a thorough 3D model of the crime scene and all. Using the most recent computer technology and the available evidence, Marianne's parents once more discussed the importance of DNA testing. 11 years after their daughter was killed, authorities decided to finally think about changing the law at this time. The required amendments were approved on September 6, 2012, after a process that lasted almost 2 years. Please ask all men who were between the ages of 20 and 40 in 1999 to bring their DNA samples to the press conference. The archive. They estimated that they were talking about 8,000 men, but not all of them agreed to provide their DNA. The area was also limited to 5 kilometers. Just over 6,500 samples were successfully collected by the police, and experts started analyzing them. Since the lab's resources were constrained and they could only check 400 samples per week, the study had to last up to 4 months. The experts compared the samples to the killer's DNA profile, but they weren't just looking for a perfect match because the murderer was improbable to have used the samples. Would have provided the police with his DNA. The laboratory was also attempting to identify the similarities that would allow them to establish kinship and connect the murderer to a father, brother, or other relative. A month after the test started, on November 19, experts received the long-awaited match. It was unexpected that they didn't just discover a known connection, instead, they also obtained the murderer's DNA, proving that he voluntarily gave it to the authorities. Detectives quickly reported the arrest of 45-year-old neighborhood resident Jasper Syringa. His home was just a few kilometers from the scene of Marianne's murder. He is a farmer and a father of 2. The defendant initially remained silent, but after speaking with his attorney, he decided to confess. The details of this terrible crime were only made public on March 28, 2013, when the trial got underway. According to Jasper, he decided to ride his bicycle before going to bed after finishing up his farm's evening chores. He acknowledged that most of the time he was just using his bicycle as a front. In reality, he was riding to take advantage of the intimate services of local women in a nearby village. While his wife was unaware of this, he claimed in court that he had only planned a ride to get away from his wife and the difficulties on the farm and had not intended to go there that evening. He once saw Marianne alone on a deserted, dark road, and he suddenly realized he could do whatever he wanted with her. Jasper pulled up next to her in his car, brandished a pen knife, and yelled threats at her. Then he took her to a field and beat her. And murdered her during the trial. The man insisted that he killed the young woman accidentally and out of panic. He became aware of what he had done and the effects it would have on his entire family. At the time, his children, who were ages 5 and 8, were about to learn what their father had done. Jasper chose to murder Marianne for this reason and then flee, but ever since he stayed in the neighborhood, heard people discussing the murder, saw Marianne's family, his conscience has been troubled. When a widespread DNA screening program was announced in 2012, Jasper realized he would be discovered because he had so many relatives in the neighborhood and one of them would have turned and his DNA experts would find a partial match and start looking into all his relatives, which would inevitably lead to his capture. Since then, he has repeatedly considered turning himself into the police but has never made up his mind. Nevertheless, he couldn't bring himself to confess at the police station. The judge handed down his sentence of 18 years in prison, out of a maximum of 20 years under Dutch law, on April 19, following a brief trial that lasted only a few weeks. Marianne's family finally got to see the offender punished, but because of his good behavior, the legal system gave them a nasty shock. Jasper will have served less than 10 years in prison when he is released as early as 2023. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching. The student got on her bike and rode off. The police launched a search after reading Without a Trace, but none of them could have predicted the shocking information that would be revealed to them in just a few days. Even seasoned FBI agents were horrified by the shocking details that came to light in the case, and none of them anticipated the outcome.
Welcome to A to Z Crime Stories. Before we start, don't forget to like this video, and subscribe for more.
On February 11, 1996, in the small American town of Delta, Ohio, Sierra Juggin was born. The girl had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and she grew up in a big, loving family. Sierra was an avid sports fan she loved to travel and was on the school volleyball team. The girl had always wanted to travel to Italy, and she worked very hard to make that dream come true before she was able to go while she was still in school. After graduating from high school, she began dating Josh. They attended various universities. Sierra made the decision to major in human resources with the intention of landing a job with her uncle, who ran a metal fabrication business. Despite the distance between her home and Toledo University, which is 50 kilometers away, she enrolled there, made plans for their future, and intended to continue dating. Even selecting engagement rings for their upcoming wedding took some time for the couple. The young woman spent her summer vacation in her hometown after 2 years of university. She still had some schoolwork to complete at that time, but she chose to do it from home in order to spend more time with her loved ones and her boyfriend. Sierra was also participating in an internship program at her uncle's business. The young woman, who was in her 20s, was meticulously preparing to soon after graduating, work there. Sierra made the decision to drive to her boyfriend's house on July 19, 2016. A few days prior, she had acquired a new bike, which she was eager to ride. At around 5 o'clock, the young lady left the house and left for Josh's house around 9 o'clock. When her mother got home, she discovered her daughter was gone. She found this to be a little odd. Since it was summer and getting dark outside just now, she had assumed Sierra would have returned home by this point. The young lady was also already in her 20s, so her mother wasn't concerned. She had assumed that her daughter would spend the night at her boyfriend's house, but when Josh called her at 10:30 p.m., everything changed. Sarah's boyfriend was unable to reach her, so he inquired as to whether she was at home. The young man claims that they split up at around 7 o'clock and that she hasn't gotten in touch since. The young woman's mother started to worry a lot because it had been more than 3 hours since then. Josh joined them in making calls to the young woman's friends and family in the hopes that she had dropped by one of them. Although Sierra was 20 years old, the police immediately started their search after learning that Josh was the last person to see her. When they spoke to him, the man said that the young woman arrived at his house shortly after 5 p.m. after traveling for about an hour and a half. The mother then called all the nearby hospitals, but no one there either. Finally, the woman decided to go to the police, and around midnight she filed a missing persons report. Josh rode his motorcycle while Sierra rode her bicycle. The couple's vehicle traveled through numerous cornfields along rural roads. Josh even captured a photo of Sierra riding her bike, which the teenager shared on social media. After some time spent riding around, they made the decision to part ways. A mile or so from her house, Sierra and Josh split up. She rode her bike home while the guy returned on his motorcycle. Other officers were driving around in search of Sierra while the police spoke to the young man. They moved toward the road close to. They soon noticed the first unsettling clue as they drove along the road through the fields, where the young woman had started her solo journey home. The corn stalks in one area were heavily pinched, as if someone had waded through them, one of the officers noticed. With a flashlight, he made his way over there, and after a short distance, he noticed Sierra's bicycle. The police officers examined the bicycle and discovered blood stains on the handles and a woman's sock next to the bicycle. He informed his co-workers about the find, and soon additional police officers showed up. A screwdriver, some car fuses, and a pair of men's sunglasses were among the additional items they discovered upon closer inspection not far from the bike. The bicycle was transported across the cornfield following motorcycle tire tracks, which was equally intriguing. All of this was sufficient for the investigators to draw the depressing conclusion that Sarah had most likely been stolen. They started to take a closer look at Josh as a suspect as the case took a serious turn. First of all, statistically speaking, the people who are closest to them are most likely to end up being the culprits. Second, Josh was riding a motorcycle that evening, and Sierra discovered tire tracks near the motorcycle. In addition, the detectives questioned why the man didn't ride his motorcycle home instead of walking the young woman. She had less than a mile to go. Josh agreed to let the police look around his home, car, and motorcycle, so that's where the officers went. Stumbled upon his work overalls, which had blood on them. The young man claimed that the blood on the clothing came from animals, and that he had worn them while hunting. The overalls were given to specialists by the investigators, and they quickly determined that he was telling the truth. Otherwise, there was no evidence to support Josh's involvement. The specialists also looked over the field finds and took one DNA sample from them that belonged to an unidentified person. Josh offered a sample right away, but it did not match, so he was no longer taken into consideration. A potential suspect, and the police began looking for additional leads. They got a call from a farmer the next day. The man claimed that he and his son were traveling down the same road on the evening of Sierra's disappearance. They came across a motorcycle helmet on the side of the road at one point, and the father instructed his son to bring it to the vehicle. Later, when he looked at it more closely, the farmer discovered some blood on it. The police acknowledged that the helmet may have belonged to the kidnapper when he contacted them later, but their identity was still unknown. When the FBI became involved in the investigation at this point, they chose to closely examine the picture Josh had taken of Sierra just before she vanished. The detectives were able to identify the young lady's clothing thanks to the photo, but they also noticed that she was sporting a fitness bracelet on her wrist. The device had been turned off shortly after Sierra vanished, so the investigators were unable to locate it when they immediately requested geolocation data for it. Added tip was given to the police. Soon after, Josh reported that a suspicious-looking white van had been following him and the young woman as they were traveling down the road. The driver appeared to be following them, according to the man. When the couple slowed down, the car, which was moving slowly, also slowed down. Josh even attempted to drive up to him at one point, but the driver veered off. The man found it odd, and he even partially remembered his license plate number. The car and its owner, who was discovered to be a woman, were quickly located by the police. And investigators found that she was unrelated to the crime. She herself claimed that Josh had attempted to approach her from behind and push her off the road during the conversation. Investigators came to the conclusion that there had merely been a breakdown in communication between them and kept searching for new leads. After searching for several days without discovering any new information regarding Sierra's disappearance, the police decided to speak with every person who had ever been convicted of a violent crime and lived in the neighborhood. Communities close by. As they read through the list of these individuals, they noticed James Worley, a 57-year-old man, right away. He was a short distance from the field where Sierra's bicycle was discovered. The police were so interested in him for a very clear reason. In the 1990s, James had been found guilty of kidnapping a young woman. She was on her bicycle when a man suddenly rammed into her in his van while brandishing a screwdriver. Sierra vanished while he was trying to force the young woman into the car, so she was able to escape. Police immediately suspected James of kidnapping after learning about his bike ride and the screwdriver found next to him. He was consulted by her investigators to confirm this theory. Although he claimed he had not killed anyone and was obviously annoyed by the visit, the man voluntarily allowed the police to search his home. On their 120-acre farm, where James and his mother resided, there were a variety of buildings. The detectives took a while to examine each one. James repeatedly insisted to the police that he had not kidnapped the victim throughout this process. Sierra and it were the only two who were aware of the case. The man was literally saying the same thing over and over, which started to seem strange to them, but something more intriguing awaited them after that. Suddenly, James revealed that he had recently traveled along that road on the night of Sierra's disappearance and that his motorcycle had broken down not far from where the police later discovered the young woman's bicycle. He allegedly saw her bike and decided to approach it, so he entered the field while pushing his motorcycle close by. The man continued by saying that as he was walking there, his helmet, sunglasses, screwdriver, and car fuses all fell out. James' motorcycle abruptly started up once more, and he continued driving without picking up all those items. The detectives, as you might have guessed, were very dubious of this story. In addition, a witness who had seen a strange van on that road the evening of Sierra's disappearance had come up to them just a few hours earlier. The vehicle was traveling at a very high speed, exceeding all legal limits when the witness noticed it. He committed the license plate number to memory and provided the police with that information. Detectives discovered the van belonged to James after running the blades, and during a search, he discovered it close to the house. The police found some interesting items inside the van, including a ski mask, duct tape, plastic clamps, handcuffs, and a maze, after the man permitted them to search it. The items themselves did not in any way suggest his guilt, but given James' history of kidnapping, a set like this raised suspicions in the eyes of the authorities. But in one of the barns, the spookiest penalties were waiting for them. Detectives discovered a separate room with an air mattress inside of a hidden door and chains next to it that appeared to have been put there to keep someone inside. The refrigerator that was next to the mattress contained blood traces, which the police discovered. Additionally, there was a noticeable bleach aroma, which led them to believe that the blood had undergone a thorough cleaning. The contents of a small box, however, served as the main hint. There were several pairs of bras and one pair of women's underwear had blood on it. All of this was sufficient to at least temporarily detain James while experts reviewed the gathered proof. The man was brought in for questioning and asked to explain the bloody, chained-up hidden room. James responded by telling them another dubious tale. It was just his improvised film set, he claimed, created because he wanted to set up his own studio to shoot adult material. Naturally, the detectives didn't take him at his word. The space appeared to have, however, they were unable to link it to Sierra's disappearance or find out where she was until, on the third day after she vanished, during a protracted search, police discovered Sierra's body in a freshly dug grave in a field. Her hands were handcuffed, and she had a large plastic toy in her mouth in addition to wearing an adult diaper, and medical examiners determined that she had been wearing one. In addition to not finding any evidence of violence, they were unable to even estimate the time of death. At about the same time, forensic experts were actively going over all the information gathered from James' barn. The cops also got geolocation data from James' smartphone and found female DNA on one of the pieces of duct tape next to the mattress, and it matched Sierra's DNA. It turned out that he had spent almost 2 hours close by on the night of the young woman's disappearance. Another unsettling piece of information came from the psychologist James had a judge appoint for a prior kidnapping. According to him, during one of James' sessions, James said that he was learning from his mistakes with every new kidnapping and that the following time he would bury the bodies. Evidently, the psychologist decided not to alert the police to his client's troubling statements, and only did so after the man had been charged with murder. The detectives created the most likely chronology of events using this collection of clues. Based on his geolocation data, it appears that James saw Sierra on the road that evening, struck her with his helmet, and then dragged her into a field with his bicycle. The man remained there until dusk. He called his brother at that time to inform him that his motorcycle had broken down. It appears that he did this to establish an alibi. As soon as it started to get dark outside, James drove home, got off his motorcycle, hopped into his van, and then drove back to the field where he had left Sierra and brought her to his barn. The young woman was either asleep or restrained. James was the only one who knew what happened next. It appears that he mistreated the victim for a while before killing her and burying her in a field. The victim may have stayed there for 3 days, according to expert speculation. The case went to trial despite the man's continued denial of all of these accusations. The prosecution introduced new evidence that strengthened its case against him before the trial officially began in March 2018. It turned out that James' keychain contained the key to the handcuffs that were placed around the victim's hands. However, they failed to offer any convincing defenses for their client's innocence, so they stuck with the theory that James only wanted to set up an adult film studio in his barn, and the police connected that to the murder. In less than a month, the trial came to a close, and on March 28, the jury found him guilty. James was sentenced to death as a result, and his execution is set for May 20, 2025. Given everything they now knew about the man, the detectives knew that this story was far from over. James had committed similar crimes in the past, according to the police, but he was able to escape punishment. Although they were still working on James' case, investigators were unable to connect the unsolved disappearances to him. The victim's parents created the Sierra Scholarship and worked on a bill that would have mandated the state to make an open investigation. List of people who have been previously found guilty of murder and kidnapping. The legislation was swiftly endorsed and became law on March 20, 2019. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching.